Hello everyone, this is MC Deck Discussions and I'm OhBSmall, and today I decided to go over my favorite decks of the Limited Environment Draft Tournament, so the LEDT of February 2026, so basically our very first tournament ever. So I think we're going to refer to it as Season 1, at least that sounds like it for now, but we'll find out as things evolve. And these are my own decks, so I'm not, rating other people's decks. These are just my personal favorites by villain matchup. So this is the first time, so this may be hard to believe. So I've been playing this game since 2020, close to when it first came out. And I have never built decks specific to villains, ever, in all that time. I generally speaking build decks that are just meant to go up against whatever villains and to be generally good. But this time I chose decks that were specific to the villain, and it could have been specific because I had a specific strategy in mind, or it could have been that I thought that particular hero had some qualities to it that made them particularly well suited to face a villain. And then, like I said, this will be my decks only and, my personal experience playing those decks. All right, so let's get into it right away. So I had 4 different heroes that I played. So there were 8 different, there were 4 rounds, and we would play, 2 against each villain twice. So 8 games altogether, 8 official games. We could do practice games first. Okay? And so I had 4 different heroes that I played, but I did have 4 specific decks that were my favorite decks. And each of those heroes had one deck that was my favorite of theirs. As a reminder, or just in case people don't know this, so we could play the same hero again against, different villains, but if we did, we had to change aspect. And so each of these choices for my favorites are based on that. And I did group these. I paired these up purposefully because they had some things in common about them. So let's get into the first hero. Okay. So first we had Protection Iceman versus Juggernaut. So what I had in mind for Iceman was that he would be, the goal was to have him decrease Juggernaut's attacks, and plus his thwarting when that occurred, but especially his attacks. Juggernaut can get these huge attacks and he can get these overkills. And Iceman doesn't really have as much of an ability as other heroes to, get that helmet off of him and flip into the exposed side so that he doesn't have overkill. So my goal was to reduce Juggernaut's attacks with the Frostbite upgrades, so that he could be relatively ineffective. And one of my favorite things was that I was able to eliminate Head of Steam. So let me go ahead and show you that card as a reminder of what it is. So this card on Juggernaut, so it gives him Retaliate X, where X is the number of momentum counters on Juggernaut. So he can acquire, a fair number of those and end up with 1, 2, or 3 maybe Retaliate. And when this is revealed, so it puts a momentum counter on Juggernaut. And it has this hero response. After Juggernaut attacks you, spend 1 resource for each damage dealt by that attack. Discard this card. Well, for my other hero, my goal was to just keep the momentum counters off of Juggernaut so I didn't have to worry about the retaliate. But for Iceman, I wanted to pile up enough of those frostbites on him to decrease Juggernaut's attacks to the point where it would cost me very little, maybe even 0, to actually get rid of Head of Steam when Juggernaut attacked. And I was, in fact, able to do that in the officially recorded game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show each of these heroes' decks as we go. But I'm not going to go into a whole deck discussion or anything. It's just to remind you of what's in the deck and what it is that was special about the hero and them facing these particular villains. So let's head over to this first deck then. So the reason that Iceman had such an ability to put so many frostbites on him is because of getting Iceman readied. If you get him readied a bunch of times, defensively and offensively, which is why I really like the protection aspect, why this is, in particular, a really favorite of mine, is that he could do it on both sides. So you have lots of allies in here that are Iceman allies, and we have Utopia, so that leads to constant readying. So that's why we have just, you know, a whole bunch of these allies. And then in addition, though, we would have events that would allow us to do that too when combined with Indomitable. So you could get Indomitable out in play and then be able to just defend with Iceman in the first place himself, but you could also use Preemptive Strike to then, you know, cancel all the boost icons on the villain. And again, this is another way to make sure the villain does not hit Iceman hard. You know, he has relatively little effect with his attacks, but it also, you know, when combined with Indomitable, gave Iceman extra chances to ready, and also the cryokinetic perception would allow that to happen too. So what was really great was to set up Indomitable, which there's no limit. You know, you can put all three of these out and play at once if you want. And if cryokinetic perception doesn't allow you to ready because you don't end up drawing an ice traded card, then you can just discard Indomitable and ready yourself instead. And that makes it so that on your next turn, you're able to attack, or if the villain happens to attack again, you're ready to, you know, do something about that. Though most of the time I was really wanting to set it up for the next attack in the next round. So this was really the big thing about Iceman. Plus, I love the way team building exercise is so effective in his decks, because, you know, all these Iceman traded allies plus almost every single one of his own cards allows team building exercise to be used. All right, let's head on over to the next hero, which is Shadowcat. Now, I paired these two up in particular because they had some similar strategies, and that is neutralizing what the villain was doing. So I took Protection Shadowcat up against Ebony Maw, and as a bonus game, just to kind of try it out afterwards, I took him up against Captain America, because Captain America was the villain that we actually, you know, as a whole in the tournament, our heroes had the most challenges with, and she was able to handle him, you know, really well in addition to that. So Shadowcat, what I liked about Shadowcat is that I used a different strategy with her than I did again. You know, this was in contrast with the other hero that I had used. The other hero, the goal was to really neutralize Ebony Maw so that he could not activate, right? Because then, you know, every time he activates, his spells get closer and closer to triggering and, you know, doing a bunch of bad things to you. And so the goal with Shadowcat was actually just to survive all of that instead. And then, you know, through attrition, and then, you know, just continuing to attack throughout the game, and then bring Ebony Maw down. So again, the goal here is to be ready to defend about every attack, right? So it might sound kind of similar to Iceman there, and but at the same time, I knew she was going to be able to handle very different villains, like I said, with Captain America as well. Including when playing Captain America, he's another one who could get those big attacks here and there with Overkill, and Shadowcat could just not take any damage from those at all when she was in phase mask form. So let's go to her deck real briefly as well, and check out, you know, what makes her deck special. And note again, it's another protection deck. Okay? So again, we'll see some similar strategies here to Iceman. Iceman near the beginning of the tournament and Shadowcat near the end. And so we see lots of allies in here that are X-Men allies combined with Utopia. In addition to that, we have Indomitable here for upgrades, but Shadowcat has that switching phase form ability. So we also had Ready to Rumble. And it was unfortunate in my mind that in the recording, the official recording that we had for the game, or the official play that was recorded, that I didn't really get Indomitable and Ready to Rumble out in play. Whereas in my other plays, like in fact, when I played against Captain America, I was using Indomitable and Ready to Rumble all the time, constantly readying Shadowcat and making her available to be able to, you know, be ready to attack on offense, but be ready to defend again on defense, so that she was never truly vulnerable to what the villain was doing. That the villain, if they were going to attack again, she was ready to go. And plus, having so many allies out there, if she got caught in a bad situation where she wasn't, completely prepared, the allies could defend. And in addition, and I didn't really say this in the deck discussion, the Powerful Punch, its ability is just amazing. Being able to be in that solid mass form, play this card, do an attack, deal damage to the villain, flip yourself over right then to your not the phase mass form, knowing that you will take no damage when that happens. And then, afterwards you'll flip back over to the solid mass form. But in addition, while you were in the solid mass form to begin with, you get to use its physical resource ability to help play Powerful Punch. So that whole combination is really striking. So that was my favorite move to make with Shadowcat, though I did really enjoy the use of Indomitable and Ready to Rumble, and also helping with Unflappable, when I was playing against Captain America and just constantly having her be ready. Because Captain America had a tendency to attack quite often, at least especially in the game that I played against him. All right, so there are those two that are heavily related to each other. And now let's look at the other two. And again, they have some similar types of things going on in the two decks. So let's go to the third one. Like I said, there are 4 decks altogether. Oh, by the way, so of the decks, so this one, Shadowcat only had one deck, and that was this protection deck. And Iceman had a couple of different decks, because he also had an aggression deck. Okay. All right, but it was the protection deck that was my favorite there. So now we're going to go to a hero that I actually had 3 different aspects for. And that was, I guess not. I thought I had this in the other order. Okay, so this is Psylocke. I had a couple of decks for. And I did actually really enjoy the very first deck, which was a leadership deck too. But this one was my favorite because I used Psylocke in a way I'd never used her before. And that was, I had a major focus on her alter ego abilities. I don't know, like I played Psylocke a fair number of times since she's come out, although this year, it's only during this tournament that I played her, or even in the past more than a year, actually. So it's been a while since I played her, but I had never really used her alter ego ability much at all, including in the leadership deck that I played. But in this Justice Psylocke deck called Inside and Upside the Head, I made it a pretty major focus of the deck, and that was seen in the official gameplay. So let's go take a look at that. So there, first of all, so the special things about her, right? Recycling psionic allies. That was the cool ability. So we'll go check that out. And then confusing, and then, with this deck being able to also stun the villain, which was important against Ebony Maw. So notice I have 2 of these favorite decks were against Ebony Maw with completely different strategies. So now let's check out Psylocke's deck here. All right, so if we check out that alter ego ability, okay, which actually it's not on here. Here it is. Okay, so it's the action. If you go all the way down to the bottom of this part here, it says action, exhaust 1 Psi energy upgrade, shuffle 1 psionic card from your discard pile into your deck. And she has 2 of these upgrades, so she could possibly do that twice. But of course, then you lose the resource ability of both of those cards. So you want to, so there's always this trade-off for that. But I was using, when I was in alter ego side, I used this really regularly to get 2 allies back in my deck. And those allies were Professor X, who is a psionic, right? It has to be psionic, and White Queen. So Professor X was put back into the deck, and here's with the combination that really made it cool, is I also had Cerebro out in play when I was doing this. So I would use this alter ego ability, exhaust a psi knife, and put, let's say, Professor X for our first example, put Professor X back in the deck. Then I would use Cerebro, has this alter ego action, right? Search the top 5 cards, but actually I'd get to search the entire deck because Psylocke is a psionic character, and then I'd add that ally to your hand. So I'd be able to get Professor X back and get Professor X back into play, confuse the villain, which helped to set up later on the possibility of Upside the Head being played and also stunning Ebony Maw. But even that, if that weren't available, just the ability to confuse him again. Now, if I already knew I'd have the ability to confuse the villain in other ways, because Psylocke has a fair number of events that can also confuse the villain. And so if I felt like Professor X wasn't the right choice, White Queen was very often a great choice, because White Queen could come, when White Queen comes back into play, you can discard a status card from a character. So, and a lot of times you would end up with a stun or a confuse on your character, and so that could help get rid of that, right? And then the other choice for a psionic would have been, we had Marvel Girl to choose for that too, but sometimes I didn't really have a purpose in either one of those, and so just picking any of the psionics was great. And being able to get them back into play with Cerebro meant you could get an extra card draw, basically. So you had an extra resource available to you. Plus, being able to going down to Alter Ego as often as I did made Moira McTaggart, draw you plenty of cards. Right? All right. And then the other cool thing I liked about this deck, and this didn't show up in the gameplay much that was recorded, but it did show up in some of my other games. And that was, she has her Training Regimen card. Exhaust Training Regimen, search your deck for a skill card and add it to your hand. If you're in hero form, discard one card from your hand. And Counterintelligence is a skill card. So you could also get that extra insurance of having Counterintelligence out in play. And if the villain did scheme against you, then this could prevent 3 of that scheme. And then Float Like a Butterfly is also a skill card, so you had a better chance of getting that into play. Again, that wasn't really a factor in the recorded game, but it was a factor in at least one of my practice games. All right, so then the other strategy. So what was cool about this deck was a strategy I was using where I was taking cards out of my discard pile and being able to get them back into play again, which might sound like another hero. So that other hero, let's go check that hero out and my favorite deck from them. All right, so for Domino, my favorite deck, although it's kind of iffy that it was really a favorite deck, but was Leadership Domino. But the main reason I chose this as my favorite deck is because it had one of my favorite moments in the tournament when facing against MODOK. So MODOK had that what do you call it? The Retaliate 2. So does 2 damage when you attack. And so I used a strategy for that made that go into my advantage, where I could attack with certain allies, namely, so let me go show those allies in a sec. I could attack with certain allies. Those allies would be defeated by the Retaliate, and it would trigger rapid response on my turn. Which couldn't occur anyway, just because if you attack enough times or thwart enough times with an ally, then, you could trigger rapid response in your turn. But in this case, you could do it right when your ally comes out. And then the other part, just the incredible card manipulation that Domino had in all 3 of the decks. So that was just fun overall. But here's what made this particular deck special, and a special moment in the very last round of the leadership game against MODOK. So the 3 allies that I really had in mind for being able to take advantage of rapid response being in play, and then therefore triggering rapid response right when those allies came in, would have been Cyclops, because Cyclops enters play, choose an enemy until the end of the phase, increase the amount of damage that enemy takes from each attack by 1. So you could have Cyclops do that once, attack the villain, attack MODOK, and then be defeated, and then have rapid response come back in, and Cyclops could then put that on MODOK again, and now MODOK would take 2 damage from each attack, increase each attack by 2 for every attack on him. That never happened, but it was that thought was there, and I wanted to have multiple allies where something like that could occur. Professor X is another good example of that. So Professor X could come into play, confuse the villain, but MODOK had steady, so he couldn't come in and just immediately confuse the villain. However, if MODOK came in and attacked the villain, so he had 0 attack, but he is still able to attack. He didn't have that blanked out attack that has like just the dash on it. And so he is still allowed to attack. So he could actually attack the villain, and his first confuse wouldn't actually confuse the villain. But then if rapid response were in play, Professor X would be defeated and he'd come back into play, and he could then do the second confuse, and the MODOK would then be confused. Again, wasn't shown in the actual recorded play, but that was always that possibility where that was there. And the one who is most likely for that to happen was Nick Fury, because of his card draw. So of course he's automatically going to be one that I'm going to seek. But there were 2 possibilities that could occur there. And, he could come back in so often, right? With Make the Call, you could bring him back in, get some card draw, which gave you more chances to get more rapid responses in. Okay? And so 2 possibilities could happen is, hey, maybe you draw one and it could allow you to deal extra damage, because you could deal, 4 damage to the enemy. But if you had... you could deal 4 damage to the enemy with this, okay? And this was against, this was against MODOK. Oh, yes, of course, right? So you could deal 4 damage to the enemy, and then he could attack and deal 2 more damage, right? But and then if rapid response triggered, he could come back out and do that again. So you could do the 4 damage and 2 damage again. So 6 damage, 6, that's 12 damage. That's a bunch of damage. But what actually happened in the game is I used his card draw. So he drew 3 cards. He came into play, drew 3 cards, attacked the villain, which then triggered rapid response because Nick Fury was defeated by the retaliate damage, and then came back into play, drew 3 more cards, happened to draw another rapid response that could then be played, and then Nick Fury was able to attack again, draw, and then be defeated, and that rapid response also triggered, and so he drew 3 cards again. So he ended up drawing 9 cards altogether in that final round, and gave us plenty of ammunition to finish off the villain in that final round. So it was a really cool, just memorable event for me, something I've never had occur before, where these rapid responses were triggering again and again, allowing Nick Fury to immediately come back and just draw a whole bunch of cards. All right, so that's it. Let me go back to the presentation and make sure and just finish with that. And once again, the reason that I stayed with I had Domino paired up with Psylocke is because Domino was also doing really cool card manipulation abilities. So that was another really just awesome thing with all of the decks with Domino, was being able to get those wild resources and get cards back into your hand because of the wild resource abilities on them. Cards, those cards such as the resources Digging Deep and White Fox isn't a wild, but you could get White Fox into play, and that you could just set it up so that it was guaranteed to happen, with her being able to trade cards from her deck or with her card in her hand, and then when an alter ego ability doing the same, but instead with the discard pile and in her hand. So just fun abilities overall. So I really love playing Domino. That's why she was, she had 3 decks featured. But this deck just had a special moment in it, so that's why I chose this one. Okay, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the recording. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And please comment in the comment section. And I love having conversations there. Have a great one, everybody.